Camper van and motorhome owners are to blame for every single piece of litter in every single tourist hotspot in the UK. It's a disgrace. We affect towns with our poisonous tourism. Believe it or not, we even flock in our droves to road trip routes that were designed to bring tourism to areas that actually need it. How dare we visit these locations? How dare we drive on roads that the tourism boards have advertised? It's a disgrace. That's what you'd think, the way we're treated sometimes. But today I'm talking about one of many of these accusations thrown at us poisonous tourists, which is littering. Welcome to the Just Loans podcast. I'm Chris, and in each episode I'll be sharing stories from our travels, practical tips and tricks, as well as the occasional good-hearted rant about some opinion-splitting, audience-dividing issues. Things like what's better, vegans or normal people? Welcome back to another podcast episode. Today we're going to be talking about quite a contentious issue, and I've got quite a probably biased opinion on this topic, so just be mindful of that. But before we get into the main meat of this episode, I want to sort of talk about the sponsor of this episode, which is our travel guide. So if you are planning a road trip to any of the beautiful parts of Scotland, whether that is the far-flung, incredible white sand beaches of Harrison Lewis, whether it is the rugged NC 500, or whether it is the best road trip in Scotland by a mile, which is the ultimate Scottish road trip, or if you want to visit one of the hidden gems of the Highlands, well, it's not even the Highlands, but Scotland, then the Isle of Arran guide. We have travel guides available for all of these. These are in paperback, ebook. We also have the instant guide, so if you prefer something that's just a little bit easier to view on your phone, you can sort of flick through it as a PDF, and then you can sort of use the digital map and all that sort of good stuff. We have the instant guides available, 7 of them in a bundle pack for £6, which in all fairness is a bargain. 85 pence per guide. But before we get into the main story, the main topic of this podcast, I want to discuss first passengers who thank you when you sort of flash them through. Because I'm not okay with that. Like, you're not driving. You need to settle down. So this morning I was doing the school run, which I know I've covered. I hate it. Honestly. I don't know how much time I've actually lost doing the school run, but I reckon it's a good chunk of my life. And I don't know if it's worth it because my kids are not thick, but no, I'm only joking. But anyway, so this morning there's this section of road that I have to drive every day, and you know, it's them sections where people have bought houses there and there's nowhere to park at all. There's no car parking at all on any of these houses, no garages, no drives now. It's right on the road, and then they all have 2 cars. Like, for me, there should be a law that prevents this. It should be like, right, do you want this house or do you want a car? Because you cannot have both. You cannot just leave your cars there. Like, I spend at least 2 minutes each way, so 4 minutes per day, stuck because all of these people have bought these houses with nowhere to park and then have parked on the road, and now it's turned into a 1-lane section. And there's cars piled up both ways in rush hour traffic. No one can get through because there's not enough space because you've parked on the street because you bought a crap house. Buy a proper house. You can't have both. But anyway, so this morning I flashed the other cars through because it was sort of we'd been going through, and I thought, well, it's only right if I let them through anyway. And as this car's driving down, it was an eldish bloke driving, and then the passenger waved as well. I don't know if you know this, but 1, you're not driving, and 2, I didn't flash you. You're not the subject of me flash. In fact, you shouldn't even be looking for the flash because you're not driving. And now you're clearly a power-hungry freak. But it's not like, no, didn't wave at me. I felt like sticking my fingers up and being like, who are you? It honestly, it probably gets me back up. I don't know if it is a power thing, you know. Like, a lot of the time, and we are probably the worst for us blokes, like, because when we're passengers, we're not really. We're like supervisors. I suppose that's how we treat it. But this morning it was the opposite. So you know for a fact, Jean was in control of the situation, even though her husband was driving. He probably does not, like, he's probably the one where when someone asks him a question, she answers it. And anyway, so she sort of waved, and I was like, what are you waving at? I'm not even flashing you out. Silly old bint. But anyway, and also on this school run route, there's like a country road, and people didn't really do it in Scotland, actually. Not that I've really noticed, and I would notice because it annoys the hell out of us. But why do people pull up to a junction? They say that there's now for quite a distance, I'm quite far away. They wait, and then when I'm about to sort of come towards the junction that they're waiting at, it's just a road for me, then they pull out and slow right down. Or they like roll out of the junction, slow us out, and then as soon as I'm right behind them, then they accelerate. It's like, you've already done the damage now, you might as well just chill. I've already had to slam the old anchors on. I'm right up, I'm nigh on in your boot. And then you pull off as if now it's happened. As if by pulling away faster, it'll make us forget what you've done. It's unforgivable. That's what it is. And it does my absolute box in. But anyway, that's the rants for today out the way. I like starting each episode with a little bit of a rant. I don't know if you've noticed the pattern, but that's the pattern anyway. So I've told you. So anyway, bit of a backstory. I got contacted in January this year with an idea for a project. The idea, well, it was actually something I've thought of last year. But anyway, someone emailed us. And the idea was to organise a cleanup of the NC 500, essentially, to pick litter. And I thought of a project similar last year. I thought, like, why don't I maybe do something where I can speak to other YouTubers, maybe some tourism boards or whatever, get a few companies to sponsor us to like cover the sort of cost, maybe give us some equipment like waterproofs because it was going to be in like Easter time. And I was going to do something called the spring clean. I tried to get it all organised. It was a big old project. I just didn't have the time. And anyway, it fizzled out. But this person got in touch with us about this project and thought it would be a good idea. And I don't know why it did, but it really got me back up. And I think the reason being is because it was kind of, I suppose, span as if camper van and motorhome, like tourism, was to blame for the litter. And let's get this out of the way first because I am biased. I definitely am biased. I'm a camper van owner, obviously. I'm going to side on that. I'm not deluded to think that my opinion is correct either. This is just my opinion. It's a conversation at the end of the day. I just want us to discuss it and figure out what we all think and whether there's something we can come to this sort of conclusion together and hopefully make things better. So just bear that in mind, everything I'm saying. And if you're a camper van owner, or even if you're not, there's going to be a bias somewhere. And that's the first step to understanding some things, is just to understand you aren't biased. And that is mine. But anyway, got my back up and I thought, like, it's not us. It's just not. And I still think that it's not us. But anyway, so who is to blame though? Because someone's littering. And who is it? I was doing a bit of research as well. And I just thought I'd mention this because I found it funny. But like I was doing a bit of research to try and find out about how much was spent on that, whether they had any sort of budgets for cleaning up litter, whether they had any sort of budgets for increasing the infrastructure in terms of like bins and stuff. I couldn't really find out anyway, but I just found it funny that in one of these sort of meetings, I think it's a councillor Davidson said it's estimated that 80% of marine litter washed up on the beaches started out on the land. No, I would have thought that. I would say 100%, to be fair. I didn't think anything is really manufactured at sea, then brought back, then took back out into the sea and come back. I would say pretty much all of it started on the land at some point. I just thought it was funny. But anyway, so we've done a survey. This topic is part of a sort of mailing list thing that I send out. It's a survey. We send them out fairly regular. So if you want to be part of these sort of conversations and just have your input into these results in the surveys, then join the mailing list. There's a link to that in the description, whether you're listening on Spotify, whether you're watching it on YouTube or whatever, there's a link to that. And we send these out every so often and it gives us something to talk about, something to think about as well. And sometimes a lot of the things that maybe I think and certain opinions I have seem like the 100% accurate. But then when I send surveys out, I'm completely miles away from what everyone else is like. A bit like the whole campsite thing. I just presumed nobody went to campsites anymore. And then I sent the survey out and I found out that loads of you still do. For whatever reason, I don't know why. Mental illness, potentially. But so that was the case. So if you're wanting to be part of these, jump on board. But let's have a look at these survey results. So, from the people surveyed, I said, first of all, where do you travel the most? So 40%, just readjusting. 40% said England, 40% Scotland, 8% Wales, and 12% other. Presumably, they're the ones with loads of money who go abroad all the time. Or in all fairness, if I lived down south, I think I would. Because it's a lot closer, isn't it, than driving all the way up to Scotland, and you didn't want to travel in England. It's worse there. So how much rubbish do you see left around? 12% see a great deal. 24% said a lot. 36% said a moderate amount. 24% a little, and 4% not at all. None at all, sorry. Who do you think are to blame? So who do you think are the biggest culprits for littering? We are slightly, you can see the bias slightly, yeah. 1% van and motorhome owners. I think one person in the survey said that. Car tourists, 48%. Workmen, 11. Truck drivers, 16. And locals, 24. And then, which do you agree with? There is not enough infrastructure, 36%. And people will litter regardless, 64%. So, we've got a fairly decent even split between England and Scotland. There's not a lot of data there for Wales or wherever else people again is kind of irrelevant because I'm basing this more on Scotland because that's where I travel. I think England, if there's a lot of litter, it's not from tourists, generally speaking, because tourists cannot just park anywhere. And most of it, any decent area in England is quite heavily populated. So if you get into the Lake District, it's just endless amounts of people. There's no way you can say, I mean, you can probably say it's tourists because barely anyone actually lives there. It's just all tourists. So that is probably correct. But I think camper vans and motorhomes because they're all stuck in campsites most of the time. But for Scotland, slightly different. So over the last 18 months or so, we've spent over 300 nights wild camping. We didn't see our campsites, and I've covered that in a previous podcast. But if I'm honest, we rarely, if ever, see any litter. We see fire pits occasionally, which I'm presuming are from people, like, you know, when they gather some rocks together and use that to prevent, I suppose, it from setting the ground on fire. I don't know. So we say that, so presumably, and again, this is just a complete wild accusation. I presume that's probably from people with like smaller campers, like transport stuff, or groups, maybe. It's not something we do. I've got a fire pit. If I wanted to take it, I wouldn't necessarily do one on the floor. But that's about it. We didn't see any rubbish. Even where there is signs of them fire pit things, a lot of the time these places are places I can pull over, where obviously people camp, and them are normally the places I'll park the van so I can get out and go and take a few photographs and stuff. And if I'm honest, I can't put my finger on any time where I've seen anything like any notable rubbish or litter left in them places, other than just the rocks that are normally in a bit of a circle. People, like, and you're thinking, like, a few hundred years, I wonder if they're the new, like, stone circles. People will be like, whoa, I wonder what was going on here. It's a mystery. Now we were just having barbecues there, that's all. Maybe they would just get tall people, and, like, the stone circles are just their fire pits. There's a new one. I bet that hasn't been considered before. But, like, these are places, like I say, them sort of spots are the spots that I do generally jump out the van, grab a few photos because there's enough space. And I honestly didn't really see any litter there. I'll tell you where we have seen a lot of litter, though, every single time, is the full-on massive laybys. You know, the ones that truck drivers use and workmen use. And in all fairness, it's not even litter half the time. It's like full-on fly tipping, like fridges and ovens and sinks. Baths. We've seen baths in one as well. So, and that ain't someone, like, me camper van owner is driving along and thinks, I'm going to get rid of this fridge here, and just throws the fridge out, or just rips the wet room out and chucks it by the side of the road. That's not that. That's locals fly tipping. That's what that is, not us. Sorry to disappoint you. Sorry that you have to look at yourself, because it ain't us. And I would say the worst places that we've ever seen for littering, like actual litter, not the fly tipping stuff, is only ever really at the, like, really popular tourist spots. Now, when I mean popular, I mean like the tourist spots that people go to, not just camper vans. like say Glencoe as a prime example. In all fairness, I didn't see really a lot of rubbish in Glencoe. Do we? I don't think so. Yeah. Again, nothing I've noticed. And there's probably not many places in Scotland as busy as Glencoe. Honestly, I really don't know where a lot of this reputation comes from. I'm sure there is litter, but I mean, we were up there a lot and we didn't see it. But in them places where you do see it, sometimes it's around the bins, and because they're just didn't empty them often enough, and that is the job. Like if there's rubbish around a bin and it's full and it's overflowing, maybe you should look to actually empty the bins more often. It's a bit like here. As soon as they changed this, I don't know why they thought it was going to be a good idea. Let's do it every 2 weeks instead of one. You didn't get a bigger bin. It's the same bin. So now what do we do with the rest of the rubbish? Are you cutting back? But that's not our problem. You cannot run a business properly. It's not like the rubbish is gone away. It's just not. You've already got us doing half of your job for your recycling stuff that doesn't even get recycled. Like I get wrong off Danny all the time. Well, that needs to go in the recycling. Not that bit, but that bit. I'm not doing that. Like, sorry, but that ain't my job. And half of it's not getting recycled. And Scotland and that, they have the bottle banks and all the rest of it, and like glass, fair enough. But other stuff, like just come out every week and empty the bins, do your job. That's the bare minimum. Like you cannot then complain that there's litter. There is litter because you're not emptying the bins enough. You get to the Isle of Arran, they've got sometimes, it's like bins are knocking about together. It's like, there's like, I think people from the Isle of Arran have sailed across to mainland Scotland and pillaged all the bins because there's endless amounts of bins on Scotland. And guess what you didn't see? Rubbish. So that, coupled with the fact that one of the most impactful things I've ever seen on Arran is when we went over there, the school kids were out from Brodick Primary School with the teachers with a yellow max on, and it was raining because kids are actually allowed outside when it rains in proper schools. And then they were litter picking. And I'm not necessarily for child labour, but that's not what that is. It's teaching the kids a valuable lesson, because if they're picking that up and then they see the parents litter, they're going to be like, Dad, didn't throw that outside. Like, we have to pick that up. Or my teacher was telling us how litter, this, that and the other. Like, educate them on that. Guess what? They're not going to grow up and do. They're probably not going to litter because they were educated as a young kid that littering isn't good. We were kind of not like that. And people just, I do think a lot of it probably does come from kids and like just younger people. Like if I see any of me kids, any of the three of them chucking any rubbish, I will drag them back. They'll pick it up and they'll pick all the rubbish up as well. Danny's the same. Like that isn't okay. You just didn't leave your shit all over the place. You didn't litter. It's not right. And you need to tell your kids that it's not right. And if you see any of your mates doing it as well, you'd be like, what are you doing? You cannot just do that. I see a lot of it from camper vans, like caravans, you'll see them parked off grid and there's a load of rubbish around where they are. But in all fairness, the whole thing just looks like you've turned up to a tip. It's disgusting. And I've covered that in a previous podcast as well. But I honestly didn't think it. And in all fairness, a lot of the people that do moan about seeing litter the most are the ones that rarely travel. Maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and they'll go for like a long weekend, or they're maybe gone for a week. You cannot have an opinion. You're not there enough to say that. Like if you go to Scotland, or I don't know, to a tourist spot, like if you go to say, I don't know, Cornwall, and you've got a mental illness and you decide that by choice you want to go and visit Cornwall, I'm going to cover that in another one because it's horrible. But anyway, you go down there. If you go in the summer, right in the height of when everyone's there, everyone's off school, everyone's off work, whatever. You go in there and obviously it's busy. There's going to be a spike in litter because there's more people there. That's just that. You cannot then claim that it's always disgusting. You just cannot. Like, that's not a thing. How do you know? You've been once? Same with people going to Scotland. They say the same thing. Oh, I went to Skye and there was some litter. Where? Where was this litter? Because I didn't see it and we're there all the time. You're full of shit. Like, it's just not. And the survey results, I know we've got 24% on there for locals. I think it's a much higher percentage than that in England. I would say it's at least 50% is from locals. I don't necessarily agree in Scotland for some parts because there's not that many locals there and there's a decent chunk of litter. And a lot of the people who live in these rural places, they're normally quite a bit older. So I don't think it's necessarily that high. But I think car tourists, I think that's who it is a lot of the time. I think that it's more than 48% for me because it's the people with the kids. I don't think there's that many adults. I know there is that litter, and I think that whether there's bins or not, these people will litter regardless. But I think it's the people who ever have kids with them a lot of the time, and it's the kids just chucking stuff, or younger, like your early 20s, the little wrong'uns who come up and camp. Like me and my cousin, I think it was on maybe me and Pete, we went up to where did we? I think it was Great Gable. We went and done a hike up there and done like a wild camp. And even up there was piles of rubbish where people had obviously went wild camping, couldn't be asked to take the rubbish home with them and just left it. Like literally just left piles. And there was, I think people had been doing litter picking and had actually left it all in one pile because it was all over the place. Obviously you kind of just hike back down with all of that sort of stuff if you've done like a big cleanup in there and you've gathered everyone's litter. But the amount of rubbish so like even the people that have gone to the effort of gone to this place is still doing that. So maybe we need to spend a bit of time. I mean, you're not going to put bins on mountains. Didn't put bins on mountains. That's not the answer. That's not what I'm saying. Educating them, definitely. But I don't know what the solution is. But I think a lot of the time, one of the worst things that they come to is when they point the finger in the wrong direction and then they just pursue that endlessly. They think, oh, well, it's camper van owners and motorhome owners because they're there all the time. Well, it's not though, is it? Like we go to these places because we like the unmolested sort of beautiful places like this. And if you go to them places, there's very little rubbish. And now they say there's loads of litter on beaches. I didn't see it. I see a lot of fishing wire, like fishing lines and nets and that on these beaches. I didn't really see a lot of actual rubbish. I can't think of a single time where I've just thought, Jesus, look at all of this. And nah, I honestly don't. Like I say, the only times that's ever been the case where I thought, bloody hell, this is horrendous, was when we went to, it was the first time I took Danny to Skye, and on the way home we were near Loch Garry, I think. And we camped in it was like a lay-by thing where it goes off the road and then comes back on like a big and what like trucks would normally stay at. And we ended up calling it like Camp Crackdown. It's in one of the videos that we've published. And the whole thing was just, it was just like I presume it's just fly tipping because it wasn't like rubbish. It was like full on fridges and that. It was like household waste. And that obviously doesn't, like, tourists are not responsible for that. So I don't know. It would be interesting to hear what everyone else thinks about this because, like I say, it's a hard one to unpack. There's a lot to go over in this. But like I say, for me, I wouldn't say it's camper van and motorhome owners. But like I said at the beginning, I am biased because that is us, that is me. And it's worth, before you sort of have your opinion in this, just having a think of your bias first of all. Because we've all got one. But like I said, if you do want to be part of these conversations, get yourself involved in the mailing list and we'll send this kind of stuff out all the time. If you're watching this or listening to this on Spotify, there's also surveys, so you can do a Q&A. You can take part in this exact survey. Go on to the episode and there's a Q&A bit in there and you can put your vote as to who you think it actually is because it'll be interesting to see. But in upcoming episodes, we've got a few doozies. We've got the Highland tax coming back up again because I've done a little bit more research on that one. What's the other topics we've got? We've got some about wild camping. We've got some Q&As coming up. We've got all sorts. I'm trying to rope Danny into this a little bit more because it's easier when there's other people and it's better to have a bit of a conversation and have a different opinion to just me ranting on because I'm not always right. Just 99% of the time. But with that, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next episode.